All right. As I was mentioning, Dr. Billy Crow is the nematode guru, and I gave earlier his email address because in communicating with him, he was very interested to help with any questions people had. So his email address is W like water, T as in Tom, C as in citrus, R as in Ralph, at UFL like University of Florida, and then .edu like education. So feel free to do that. Oops, there we go. So, and looking through this program, we'll look at again what they call plant parasitic nematodes. Those are ones that are going to be damaging plants. There's lots of others, of course, that aren't damaging. They are important because they damage our edibles and our ornamentals as well. So it is a concern and a costly concern. We'll look about different ways to manage it, and also how to solarize the soil, because that's something we can do to suppress them for a while anyways, and then looking at nematode sampling procedures, which may be for bigger operations than backyard settings. But all right, so nematodes are microscopic worms, so you need a microscope to see them. They are considered unsegmented roundworms, although I always ask Dr. Crow about, it looks like there's segments here, but he said that's just the outside. It's not really a segmented type of worm. They're microscopic, and it's interesting. They have to live within a film of water around soil particles. So they do need some moisture, although I think they can get too much where they might even drown. But this stylus, this spear-like mouth part is what's used to puncture into roots and to suck out liquids and such there. But in general, they're going to be damaging to the roots, and of course, that's going to cause above ground issues. And nematodes are just in every environment you can think. Most are in the ocean, but there's some inside too, which would be like roundworms. Roundworms and yeah, I say, hang on. Yes, Doug? Hello. Yeah, we're going through with it. And so keep trying to get in, because we've been dropped off several times. So okay, I'm in the middle of doing nematodes, so keep trying. Okay, all right, bye-bye. Okay. That was a call from headquarters. Doug can't get on. Film at 11. So many are in the ocean. Some are parasites of animals. Again, roundworms, intestinal worms, I guess even heartworms can be that. Many are, again, in just plain old soil, and some are in fresh water. Some are purely aquatic. But a percentage, only 10%, are in plants. And while most are harmless or helpful, even predators that would feed on bad insects or pests, again, there are animal parasites and, of course, the plant parasites, and that's what we're concerned about today. This is where we got dumped the last time. Again, just shows a life cycle. The females do lay eggs. The eggs do hatch, and then the larvae begin to enlarge, and again they molt. If you can think of worms as molting, and finally they get big enough where, of course, not only the larvae but the adults are beginning to attack the roots. Some nematodes get all the way inside the root and feed, and some just feed on the outside in. But of course, that's going to begin to cause the damage, the rotting, the deformities, the gall forming, and again, that's going to cause the plant roots not to work, and of course, it will show up in the upper parts of the plant. So there's the mouth part, the microscopic version. You can see it's coming out of the mouth here. So it is a needle-like structure. Oops. And I guess what it does too, of course, it sucks out the plant juices, but it shoots in the some kind of digestive juices to begin the digestive um, um, cycle and help it also to suck in the liquids. Of course, some of those digestive juices may cause some of the problems with the root functions as well. Now, most feed on plant roots, but there's some foliar nematodes, which is interesting. And here's a sample right here. You can see in this leaf, there's almost very angular block-like damage. And that's typical of the foliar type ones. And again, I guess they climb up in there, and I believe what they'll do is they'll get into the tissue and move within the tissue, feeding on them. And they've got some of the plants, chrysanthemums, some ferns, anthuriums, and azaleas that might have this. I personally have not seen it around here, but I bet it's probably a problem in the greenhouse industry and the foliage industry. So again, just to know, there are foliar feeding nematodes. And then, as I was mentioning, some feed outside, some go inside as far as the way that they feed. So they call those ectoparasites. So here's feeding on the outside of the root. They just push their head in, and of course the stylet goes inside. While here, they've actually migrated into the root, and they've stained these so you can see them inside the root itself. So just breaking down, they have all little cute names for them: sting and stubby root and spiral and ring and lesion. So these are just little descriptive labels they attach to certain nematodes just because of what they do and how they cause, what the symptoms look like, etc. So some of the ectoparasites are the ones that feed outside the root: the sting, the stubby root, the spiral, and the ring. Migratory endoparasites, those again that go in and they move about, I guess, within the root. They've got the lesion, lance, burrowing. Well, that would make sense. And foliar. Again, those are ones that would move about. And then there are some that they call sedentary. And again, sorry, this is the endoparasites feeding inside. And then they got sedentary ones that just sit there. And once they get in, they just feed in place. Again, the famous one, the root knot ones, and there's also some citrus ones. So how do they damage plants? Well, again, look at this here. Here's normal root growth, and here's nematode damage. And so they really cause the roots to stop functioning. Of course, roots are tender, have very tender tissue, and they're all about absorbing water and nutrients. And once that's damaged, it's going to start showing up in the upper parts of the plant, of course. And again, you can see this. You can see this visibly with the naked eye. What you can't see is all the nematodes invading into the roots there and causing this actual damage. So the above ground issues, sometimes they're a bit subtle, and you might just see yellowing or slow growth or decline. This looks like here there's a bottle brush tree, and that's famous for having problems with nematodes. It looks like tomato here too is getting some. So, you look here and you say, oh, it's yellowing a little bit. Maybe it's a nutrient issue. It's very hard just to look and say what it is for sure. And a lot of times, it's going to have to be a lethal examination, of course, to see the roots. Who hasn't over time picked tomatoes out of the garden at the end of the year and found the roots just knobbed up? I find oftentimes they've done their purpose, and when I pull them out, of course, they're done anyways. But you can often see that damage at the end of its life there. But things like bottle brush, I had terrible nematode problems with figs and with Barbados cherry too. They just totally destroyed them. And I noticed the decline occurring, and then I gave up. And when I pulled them out, the roots were just knobbed up to bits. But there's similar things. It can look like, drought damage or disease or just general stress of some type. So being microscopic, we have to uh, guesstimate a little bit here too. But below ground, if we were to pull these up, um, again, it'd be best to see normal and abnormalness side by side here with this one. But you see these knobs and galls here. Um, they're thickened. They're not working properly. They're stunted. This one, healthy roots, it's white and healthy looking. But over here, the damaged roots are thickened. Some have rotted too. So sometimes the nematodes are going to wound things where it may even bring in secondary conditions. Here's carrots too. They forked out because they've been damaged by nematodes, and perfectly edible and all, but commercially they're going to want a nice long straight carrot, and that's nematode damages certainly cause it to be less saleable. Some other declines, and again, it depends on the species. Now, I will say about tomatoes that you can buy nematode-resistant or tolerant tomatoes. And the problem I understand is, though, as the heat gets higher, the nematode resistant begins to wear off. So it has its limits on that, unfortunately. But it depends on what kind of nematode you've got, how many there are, how susceptible the plant is to, and of course the temperature, and then other stresses. Is it raining a lot? Is it dry? Are there other issues? Look at this here in this turf. That could be almost anything. It could have been where a dog went. It could have been an off herbicide application or drought damage of something like that. Sometimes very, very difficult to finally determine just by looking. But there are some things that would suggest nematode problems. All right, looking at parasitic nematodes in the vegetable garden, and the root knots are probably the #1 nematode. And I've seen this all the time. I find it on my tomatoes, but also okra. And I did have another big problem with nematodes in okra. And I'll tell you hopefully later if I remember how I took care of that. But root knots, the galls are very susceptible. Again, tomatoes I've had them on, and okra primarily, and I guess to a degree squash when I pull the squash out. So this is all the damage of them working. They're showing here an adult female, which again with these sedentary nematodes is just like a big round ball in a way. But here's the eggs. To look at it, I would never have recognized it. It doesn't look like a worm to me anymore. But a lot of these sedentary ones develop this rounded appearance. Again, it may not be that obvious. It could be some other things too. It says here, in tap roots, galls may not be visible, and the roots just get knobby. Oop. So here's a carrot, I guess, here. It's got this knobbiness here. Who knows what's going on? Here's a potato and such, and look at the knobbiness going on there. And again, when they've cut it here and put some dye, you can start seeing the feeding sites. But again, it may not be something that's perfectly obvious, but it's certainly suggesting. Here's a normal onion. Here's one's affected by nematodes. So again, in general, it's going to be decline, deformity as possible symptoms here. Now, don't confuse things too. Now, here's, I believe these are the bacterial nodules that you might find on legumes, and there's some other nodules on certain plants too. I think it's Podocarpus puts these type of nodules on too. That may look like root knot damage, but they are, in the case of legumes anyways, just the bacteria that fix nitrogen from the air in that symbiotic relationship versus truly, elongated, coalesced root knots here. All right, just showing the different types of nematodes and what vegetables they attack. Again, root knot is, across the board everywhere, as is the sting version as well. I mean, there's so many others here, but they don't tend to be as problematic, I guess, that you could say. So again, I would say root knot is the one that you're going to see the most symptoms are, and you've probably already seen them. All right, now this is interesting. There are no chemical, I guess, nematicides for control in vegetable gardens there. However, this one material mentioned Melocon, and I wrote a note to myself about that material. Let's see. Now I can't find it. Where did I put that? Okay, well, anyways, Melocon, I believe, is a bacteria-oriented nematocide. Oh, here it is. No, sorry. It's a naturally occurring fungus. All right, not a bacteria, but a fungus. So it is commercially available. So it's a bio type product. I've never seen it available. You probably have to go online to find it. But the best you can help for is suppression. It's not going to eradicate. So again, a naturally occurring fungus that they found that helps suppress nematodes, that's going to help. Sanitation. Every time that you might have a tool and put it into the garden, you probably could keep reintroducing because they're microscopic. You can't see them. You move from one place to the other, you may introduce them. You want to keep the garden weed free because weeds can be reservoirs for them. And as just part of plant sanitation in a vegetable garden, you want to, of course, remove the old plants and the roots as much as possible because that's going to take away, of course, a lot of the population. We can soil solarize. We can use cover crops too, and we'll talk about that. Organic amendments, that seems to be helpful too. They think that putting compost in introduces parasites and predators of nematodes. And I mean, I add organic matter all the time into my garden. And I will say that, again, for my okra problem, I really socked in the organic matter and it just made a day and night's difference. Before I had not done as much and I really was losing okra crops very early too. But adding organic matter, compost was really helping a lot to alleviate that and having full term crops. Crop rotation too is another thing. You know, if you've got a lot of nematodes in that area, rotate to another area that's clean, at least initially. You know, it's always going to go from order to disorder as far as the amount that are there. And we talked about resistant varieties. Well, again, there are nematode resistant tomatoes, but that is sort of limited by the temperature a bit. Here we go. But nematodes on their own move very slowly. They don't get around very much, but they can get moved by us, moving plants, the water, soil, tools. So, you know, it's always a good idea. And again, I don't know who practices this as much as they should, but to disinfect tools with a 10% bleach solution is helpful. Remove nematode-infected roots after harvest, and don't compost because, you know, likely that nematode-infected roots are not going to get hot enough in the compost process to get rid of them. So you want to get rid of those somewhere else. So again, how do nematodes spread? Just think of anything that you do moving about, and you could have accidentally moved in nematodes because they're invisible practically to us, and so it's always possible that's going on.
Hey Ralph, do you want to answer questions in the chat box as we go along?
No.
Okay.
Not till the end.
Okay.
Only because
there's 2 there right now.
Okay, we'll go over that. Yep. So with soil solarization, say that 5 times fast. It definitely does work, and it's going to suppress nematodes or kill them actually for a period of time. and it's a good way to go, especially if you're more of a fall, early winter garden person and not a summer garden person. It's an ideal time to do that. You're going to want to use, again, a clear plastic type material. And I wrote a note down here. Oh, I think it's 1 to 4 millimeters is recommended. Yeah. Um, get the best plastic that you can get, because, out in the sun, it's liable to break down. And if you break the seal, that's not going to help it either. So it's going to maintain the temperatures depending on the time of day. And you're doing this during the summer, of course. So, June, July, August there. You're going to do 4 to 6 weeks minimum. And it potentially could cook the soil down to 12 inches. So that's a pretty good deal, considering, again, that the nematodes don't move that much. But it's only sterile for the point of time that you've done it, and then, of course, they're going to reinfest it. Not going to work in shaded areas because we need the sun. It's going to not only kill nematodes, but weed seeds and insects and diseases and all that. But it's also going to hurt the beneficial organisms, so that will have to come back on its own. You don't want to recontaminate it, of course, too. And generally, when you're doing it, you're moistening it. You're making sure there's a good seal on it. And again, it's just like a little greenhouse, and it's really going to do a pretty good job of cooking, especially in Florida. Says here, root knot nematode eggs and juveniles are highly susceptible, so that's a good thing. Most plant parasitic nematode species recolonize soil, the damaging population numbers by the end of the crop cycle following solarization. So it's going to act for a season there, and that's about as good as you can get. So it should be a regular practice to help keep out those darn nematodes. They're also talk about some cover crops that people have tried, and we'll look at that too. So hang on there. But organic amendments, we're all accidentally introducing nematodes, but I can't even. I need more compost than I can make. But for the compost that I have, when I add it to as an organic amendment to the soil, it really helps. And I think it helps, again, as I mentioned, because they suggest that it's introducing predators and parasites and nematodes. It's also helping with moisture retention, because if the roots are damaged, anything you can do to help the roots stay hydrated longer is going to be good. So that is a positive there too. And certainly, it's always a good idea to continue to add organic amendments. And I'm talking about your vegetable garden. Of course, that's where we can keep doing that. Now, cover crops, as a practice, is always a good idea if you can do it, because what it does is it adds organic matter, and it opens up the soil, and it can also, in the case of legumes, add some nitrogen back. So anytime you can do that as in this case, a summer crop, it's good. And they say it may also, again, suppress some types of nematodes. So here's your choices here. And then at the bottom it says, of course, yes equals should reduce nematode populations. No equals might increase nematodes. We don't want to do that. That's against what we're trying to do. So anyways, for cowpeas, and again, this is it's a southern pea type thing. It says for root knots, it depends. I don't know what that means exactly, but no for sting. Sun hemp, if you've ever seen that, some people will grow that on their larger acreage as a cover crop. It can suppress root knots to a degree and sting. Sorghum, yes for root knot, no for sting. Now marigold. Marigold is something that's been touted for years. You see about intercropping and such, and there's even I don't know if they brought it back out, but there was an EDIS publication on using marigolds to suppress nematodes. And I believe the bottom line answer is, if you're trying to plant them as an intercrop to try to suppress nematodes run under the vegetables, it doesn't work. But under certain conditions, and you'll have to read the publication because it got complicated there, if you had nothing but marigolds and you tilled them in and did it just right, it might suppress them. There are some nematodes that don't like marigolds, and that may drive them out. So that may be part of it. Velvet bean, I'm not really as familiar with. But it does say it depends on root knock and yes on sting. Rye, again, I guess that would be your annual type, yes to root knot, no to sting. And putting Bahia grass in, Bahia grass, nematodes don't like to feed on Bahia grass. So in a way, what you're doing is you're putting something in that they can't live on, so they're going to die or move or whatever. So there are some opportunities here, but you'll have to really dig into it, no pun intended, to get the details of how this works and when you should put it in and when you should till it in, etc. Some other cover crops, hairy indigo. Again, these are going to be probably for larger scale settings. Pangola grass, digit grass, showy crotalaria shows good for hairy indigo for root knot and pangola grass, fair for digit grass, and showy crotalaria good. So these are just some others to try if you can find a source of them too, because of course some of these are going to be perennials and you'll have to somehow get rid of them before you replant there. So here's the marigold issue, and so the publication is marigolds for nematode management. But as you can see, they're saying here this intercropping. So you got some beans or something with nematodes. Looks nice. I mean, with marigolds, that looks nice, but it's really not very effective. Generally, it has to be a solid, big crop, and I think there were certain types of marigolds that were better than others. So, this is really a myth. This may have some possibilities, but I think there's very distinct guidelines you have to follow in order for it to be effective. Now, we talked about resistant varieties here, and you look at a plant tag of seedlings, or you look at the seed pack, and it will generally, we know what V is verticillium, wilt resistant, F is fusarium, wilt resistant, and then it will often have an N, again, for nematode resistance. And it says here refers to only 1 or 2 species of root knot nematodes, may still be damaged by other types, but it's the best we can do. Resistance is just like it says it's resistant. Doesn't mean it's going to get them, but it's going to be able to survive better. Better Boy, Celebrity, Beefmaster, Sugar Snack. These are ones that could be, but it's my understanding that as the heat increases, the nematode resistance goes away. So, for sure, as I mentioned before, when you notice at the end of the season that you have nematode-infested roots, you want to get them out of the garden because likely all those nematodes are going to go with it. And you don't want it back into the garden. Again, it may not compost properly, so that's going to be a disposal issue there. However, it says here, tilling non-infested roots in the soil will improve soil health. So, that's going to be a borderline thing as you're deciding, do I have nematodes or not? You probably have a lot of nematodes at any given time. So you may want to just do a full clean out of that. Now, certainly you can do some isolation here by using containers. And you hear all types of people using large containers or the earth box, all types of things that are initially sterile and clean. For sure, you don't want to fill them up with garden soil because that's what's going to infest it. But you want to use a pest-free growing medium. So that's going to be any of those potting soils, which are really often soilless soils, but they've been heat treated, so they come clean. Use disinfected tools, and of course, you don't want things to get into them too. And it goes from order to disorder. Things will eventually get up and move into there, but for the period of time, and again, as you can see here, on the left here, these are all going to be isolated one more time because they're on a non-soil base, while here they're sitting on the grass, it looks like. So that interaction, the nematodes can find that and work their way up into the pot. So what they're saying here is, so much the better, put it up on a brick. It may dry out quicker. And that's the thing with containers, is that you'll find they will, once they fill the roots, they're going to dry out a lot quicker, and you're going to have to watch that watering quite a bit. But containerized is not a bad way to go. Okay, we're going to skip the worksheet because we don't have the worksheet. and at the end, we'll look over the questions, and we'll look over the pre-questionnaire too. So don't worry, hang in there. All right, that was on vegetables. Let's look at turf grass, which again is a difficult one to ID, other than with the test there. But if you see some damage, you might see patches that are not looking good, yellowing, brown. Now, they could be a whole bunch of other things. Could be St. Augustine grass, take all root rot. Could be drought, could have been chinchpa, who knows? I mean, there's so many things that it could be. But I guess once you've eliminated all those other issues, then you should look at nematodes. And the nematode test, I think it's $25. They'll talk about it. We'll talk about it at the end. But it can be used to get a good determination of the type of nematode and what degree of damage is going on there too. So below root symptoms, we've seen this picture before. Here's healthy roots, and here's knobby, dead, rotting roots. So there's going to be that difference. But they also they crop off the roots. They damage them, so they're very stubby and short right from the beginning. And so that can be another good indication that there's nematodes afoot here. And again, I was going to say, I was challenge you to figure out what this is. And it could be, I could be scalping. Somebody's lawnmower went too low and just the grass couldn't take it, and it went kaput. But generally, this type of manifestation will appear to be nematodes. And, well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Hang in there. Drought, unfortunately, can also show up as this same type of manifestation. So, we have to look at all the variables that are going on, and then use the tools that we have too. A soil test is always a good idea, but the nematode assay may be another way to get a good insight into what's going on, especially if you were a commercial person. I mean, I would want this information. Hopefully the sod farm is nice and clean, but if new sod came in, it could have parasitic nematodes in there. And so this is one way it could be introduced. But I'm going to say that sod farms are going to be pretty pristine and clean as best they can. And hopefully they're not going to be giving you nematode-infested sod. So these are the different types of susceptibility. So Bahia grass, you almost have to say, that is the grass to go to if you're worried about nematodes. Certainly it's not really damaged by nematodes. St. Augustine is regularly damaged. There used to be, there used to be, let me just minimize this a little bit more here. I guess some tolerance here. It says Floritam tolerant of sting nematodes. Okay, that's a good thing. Zoysia commonly damaged. Bermuda commonly, when we don't deal with Bermuda, and we certainly really don't deal with centipede unless you get hammock. And seashore pest palm. I don't know if anybody has that anymore either. So most of your common grasses, other than bahia, can get damaged. They're saying here on Bermuda, again, something we really don't deal with, but there is some tolerance there. And, they're always looking for that type of tolerance as a marketable characteristic of certain grasses. But that's, generally, if you got St. Augustine, you're going to have potentially nematode damage. Now, if you've got certain weeds in your area, it may mean also that you have a lot of nematodes. Certain weeds tolerate nematodes and proliferate as the grass thins. So, spurge, nutsedge, Florida pusley. Boy, this looks like samples from my front yard here. And some weeds, of course, as we've mentioned, can serve as reservoirs. And we talked about removing weeds in vegetable gardens because, once they may be on the weed, but you put something nice and tasty like a vegetable in there, or in this case, a turf grass, and they're going to probably migrate over to that as the better choice. All right. Well, there's some things you have some wiggle room with, there's some you don't. Of course, choose tolerant grasses. That's pretty much bahia. Right plant, right place. Whether it's a sun or shade area. So you want to make sure that it fits the area as far as the turf grass. You want to remove as many stresses as possible. Now, I don't know if anybody does this. Occasionally I hear people in Charlotte County will do this about overseeding. But they're saying don't do that in the winter if nematodes are a problem. However, you can add some organic materials. There's an over spreading, including things like sludge or composted manures, and certainly that's going to help the grass do better, which is going to make the grass more potentially tolerant to nematodes, and it may, as it says here, stimulate natural enemies. But proper cultural things, proper mowing height, you don't want to be scalping them. You want to make sure, they're getting proper nutrients and water. All these things are going to mitigate, hopefully, for any stress that occurs that would make them more susceptible to be damaged by nematodes. Okay, now let me give you the details on this. And I know Dr. Crow knows a lot more about this, but I did, and I know he's talked about this, and I've listened, but I had to refresh myself on what it is here. But there are some products labeled for management of nematodes in turf grass. And the first one is Nordica, and you can see it has a wide range of dealing with certain types of nematodes. And it's a bacteria, and it's a Bacillus firmus is the material, and it lasts for 8 months. It's a caution material, so it's not a restricted use pesticide, so that's a good thing. And I couldn't tell you what amount of protection, but these are things that are going to lessen the effects of nematodes, and these are going to be used more in commercial settings or golf courses, I suppose, too. So Nordica is one recommended material. The next one, Indemnify, is it's actually a fungicide that works on nematodes, and it blocks the nematode's cellular respiration, and I guess it paralyzes them. Again, it's a caution material. It's not restricted use. Again, another good 8-month activity. So that seems to be fairly useful. So that's Indemnify. And the last one, Nimitz Pro G. They're not sure exactly what's the mode of operation on that, and I didn't get any more details, but when they're doing studies on things and they say, let's try this, I guess they found that this material does work. I can't tell you what exactly its origin is, but what it does is it paralyzes the nematodes, and then they stop the feeding. But as you can see here, while these other ones are pretty residual, the Nimitz is not quite as long life there. Okay, ornamental plants. So we've done vegetables, we've done turf, and now ornamental plants. And so these are going to be your shrubs and trees and things like that. So the first off is some are just way more susceptible than others. And you probably have known hibiscus is very not tolerant to nematodes. I know pittosporum isn't. Roses and gardenias. Now, roses, we're always going to recommend that they are grafted on those nematode-resistant rootstocks, as well as gardenia. I mean, you literally can't grow a gardenia here unless it's on that resistant rootstock. But once that's been used, that really clears the way for some more success anyways in the garden. So there's going to be some that are definitely open to attack. I know I was mentioning my fig, the edible fig, that one got nailed, and a Barbados cherry. Again, both known to have problems with nematodes, and I guess I have a good supply. But then there are some that are resistant. Well, resistant at least to the root knot nematode, and I just saw that fire spike, and I've got a fire spike, and so that was good news. Walter viburnum, of course. We don't really have sweet pepper bush here. We do have the gold dust croton. We don't have really hydrangea. So there are going to be some plants that are going to be way more resistant to at least root knot nematodes. And so that can be helpful in your selection, at least as far as not having to be troubled by that. Some bedding plants, very susceptible, which I really didn't know. Certainly grow coleus and pansy and snapdragon, petunia. And there's lots of others. So some are very susceptible, and again, if you've seen it one year, that may be a cause to rotate it, these particular flowers into another area. And of course, this is just a small list here. So in ornamentals, as I mentioned, there's no chemical nematicides. Again, remembering that melocon, and again, melocon is a naturally occurring fungus. So, with all these studies, they come upon these discoveries, and it can be used as a product. So, melocon, I guess it's a wettable granule, the WG. And I don't know where you can probably get it, at Site One, which is formerly John Deere, which is formerly Alesco, or possibly online. Don't plant susceptible or infested plants. It may be difficult to know if they come infested, but rotate the bedding plants. And again, if they're seasonal, annuals for the summer, for the fall, winter, certainly you can rotate those out. You can solarize, as I mentioned, add organic matter. I think personally, that's something I do all the time, and that's probably my best management personally that's been successful for me. When you take out the dead plants, take out any of the roots too, and then grow in containers. And again, that's going to be your fail-safe or default way of resisting or taking care of that problem. And so certainly containers are always valuable. So we've looked at vegetable, turf, ornamentals, and now the sampling part, which we used to have kits that came with a baggie and a form and all that type of stuff. But now you just have to go to the nematode lab and download the assay form. But there's certain ways of doing this, and I'm not going to get into too much detail here. But just some tips here on the vegetable garden. It's saying sample at the end of the crop. Probably at that point there's going to be the most uh, um, nematode population. You want both soil and roots. So there's going to be, of course, some in the roots, which are going to be embedded maybe, and some in the surrounding soil. Collect samples from around the drip line of each plant. For vegetables, sampling about 8 to 10 inches, but don't include the first inch. So they want that removed. Make sure roots come from the plant being sampled, because you don't want, some neighboring plant's roots popping in. That would sort of mess up the sample. You place the soil and the roots in the same plastic bag, because that's your sample. It says minimum 2 cups of soil and 1 to 2 cups of roots. That's a good amount of stuff. And you want to get it, of course, to the lab in fresh condition. So you probably, when we tell people to send samples to the pathology lab, we'd say try to do it Monday or Tuesday, so it gets there before the weekend. And, a lot of times these are going to be random samples. But on the form, it tells you, pretty much some details and guidelines. What's the best way to do this? Like, don't sample inside the dead area, because they're probably not there anymore. Collect the sample from declining. So you're looking at those edgy areas, okay, not the dead, but the ones that are beginning to decline and die near the greener areas. They want random samples from 20 spots, put into a bucket, mix them up, remove 1 pint for analysis. Okay. Place the sample in a plastic bag, seal securely, and label it. And of course, keep it cool till you can ship it, preferably overnight shipping, because of it's very perishable, and you want to have a good living sample to look at. For turf grass, they're talking about using zigzag patterns. Again, trying to find the spots that are in decline. Combine that into a bucket and use about a pint for analysis. Again, you're bagging it up, sending it off. So always refer to the lab form directions, and that will take care of you here. Proper sampling is critical, of course. Let's see, I can't see up here. Let me just move to my paper form for a second here. Okay, I can't see at one point. All right, yeah, you want to take the proper samples, because the nematodes may not be distributed evenly, so that's why you're taking these random samples, 3 to 4 inches deep. And a good sample will give you a good result. Sampling depth, and again, this is for turf, I believe. Well, here we got different types. Yeah, okay. Pre-plant samples normally taken 8 to 10 inches deep. So that would be before you put stuff in. But post-plant, the ones that you're seeing some damage on, depends on the crop. Annual crops, 6 to 8 inches, trees and shrubs, 8 to 10 inches, and turf, 3 to 4. So, follow those and you'll get a good sample there. Sample at the right time. During the winter, there's not going to be much activity and you may not find things. So, and again, at the end of the growing season is when you're probably going to find the highest populations, and of course the most damage. So what they do is, I'm not going to go into this, but they centrifuge it and they screen it and wash it, and then they count the nematodes under a microscope. And so that's quite a bit of detail to get that final reading. Look at this. It says 10 grams of roots. They put it into a coffee filter. They screen it. They mist it, and in 72 hours, this is for roots, corms, etc. They count the nematodes under a microscope. I hope they have really good eyes. see, again, I can't see well here. 10 ways to destroy a nematode sample. Okay. These are things not to do. You don't want to dry it because they're very perishable and they're wanting to see the living creatures alive. Don't put it in a large box where it's banging around. So you want it securely in a shipping box. If taking multiple samples, don't label the bags. Yeah, that will help. If shipping in a Ziploc bag, you don't put tape over the zipper. Okay. Again, these are all things not to do. They don't want grass clippings. They don't want less than a pint of soil. They don't want a sample from a dead grass, of course. Don't keep the sample on your dashboard to bake in the sun. Of course, that would be solarization, and that would be defeating the purpose. Make sure to send your foreman your money, and it says send a sample. This is what people shouldn't do. Again, send a sample on Friday or just before a holiday, because that's just going to sit and perish somewhere. So here's the nematode assay form. What the results will tell you, and I've seen a couple of these, but really it was commercial people that sent them out. Homeowners rarely do. It gives you a number of nematodes per 100 cc of soil, number of nematodes and 10 grams of roots, and then the risk. What's the risk of being a problem? So examples here. Here's St. Augustine grass, and here's the various nematodes that could be identified. And these are the numbers, of course. These are what they count. Oops. What they count. Stop it. For a moderate population of concern for sting nematodes, it would be 25. For high, it would be 50. So you can see, again, depending on the types of nematodes and the concentrations will give you more of a level of concern about if you need to really do something. Again, we're not going to do this particular thing, but hey, you can always do your own nematode sampling. Certainly, I invite you to visit the nematode assay lab, and I would just put in a search engine UF-IFAS nematode lab, and you'll see it. There's a lot of other information there, everything you need to know about nematodes, and you can probably, again, even communicate with the various nematologists, but Dr. Crow is the top one, and he's very enthusiastic about his nematodes, and when he does his program, you have a greater appreciation for nematodes. So again, Dr. Billy Crow is the guy, and he actually has I think family in Fort Myers. So when he comes to do the program for us, he'll stay at his family home, and then he comes over. But of course, that's not going to happen this time. Now I want to, let's see. I want to look at the chat box, and let me see if I can answer some questions. Okay. Well, let me start at the beginning. Hang on. Then I'll open the mic at the end here. I was kicked out. Blah, blah, blah. Can you compost the veggies that were infected? I would say no, because there's no guarantee it's going to get hot enough in that compost bin to destroy those nematodes. So I would keep infested ones out of it. Solarization is a whole different thing. Composting, you have a little less control of. Do you make your own compost, or do you purchase? I make as much as I can, but I can never make enough. So I do buy compost, generally composted manures I like to get. I think it's very, it's got some nutrients, not much, but at least it's got some organic matter and also that water holding capacity. Let's see. Let's see, wait a minute. Just trying to scroll down here, which is not working great. Hang on. Okay, I'm going to guess here with what mill plastic. In the information, some information I found 1 to 4. Um, and so that is the I want to say basic, but I would get it as thick as you can afford, because too many times with the sun beating down on it, it would sometimes rip, and you don't want to rip because you want it to stay sealed and hot and cooking there. That's a good question. Next question, hairy indigo. Is that toxic to horses? Now, I know that there's a type of indigo that is toxic to horses, but I don't think that's the one. Which is the one that, let's see, go toxic. I'm just looking up to horses really quick, because that is an issue. Creeping indigo. Creeping indigo is the one, not the hairy indigo. So that's a different one. Does anybody research coffee grounds as a management tactic? Not that I know of. What about Everglade tomatoes? Well, I mean, I've grown those too, and I did find some nematode issues on it, but I did not find a lot. But boy, I tell you, Everglade tomatoes just outgrow everything. So I think they can almost outgrow nematode damage. So you can certainly try that. It says here, I make my own compost to reduce trash. Good. Let's see, a follow-up was, oops, hang on. My gardenia thrives on coffee grounds, but I don't know how it may help with management. Again, coffee grounds are acidic. Gardenias love acid-loving conditions, so that's certainly going to help a lot with that. And that sort of answers the next one. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else here. Why is this hard to get this? Well, maybe that's the end. All right. I'm going to unmute you because I am all powerful. And then if there's any type of, okay, that's what I want to hear, is lots of laughing. Are there any particular other questions? And again, nematodes is not my expertise, but I think that from this PowerPoint, it's pretty obvious about what you could do. I mean, it's never going to be a total eradication, other than for a period of time with solarization and things like containerize. But every time you accidentally contaminate with soil or a tool, you could be starting the problem all over again. Let's go over the pre-questionnaire, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay. Number one, root knot nematodes. The root knot nematode is an important plant parasitic nematode.
Yeah.
True. It's probably like the number one. Two, the weed called spurge is very tolerant of nematodes.
True.
True. And that's that weed, I showed you a picture, but if you take spurge and you break a piece off, a milky sap comes out. So I'm feeling the nematodes don't like the sap very much. There are commercial products available that will help suppress nematodes in turf.
True. Yeah.
True. And again, I've not seen them in the box stores. I bet they might be on the specialty like Site One or online, but those are available. 4, plants such as gardenia and roses must be grafted on nematode-resistant rootstock in order to survive in our Florida soils.
True.
So, I mean, it's just a definite, you have to have that. 5, solarization has no effect on reducing nematode numbers in planting beds.
False.
False. I mean, it's the go-to process, and it works. A plant fire spike is naturally resistant to root knot nematodes.
True.
And there's a number of others too, but there's this one they found. 7, Bahia grass is particularly susceptible to nematode damage.
False.
False. It's like nematode free. So it's got other problems, but it doesn't have that problem. 8, the appearance of nematode damage in turf is distinctly different than damage caused by drought, insects, diseases, and general stress.
False.
They all sort of mimic, so you've got to dig deeper into that characteristic. 9, interplanting marigolds with vegetables will deter nematodes.
No. False.
False. It's really an urban myth. There are some studies that showed under circumstances, solid masses could be useful in taking care of that. 10, ectoparasitic nematodes feed on the outside of the root. Ectoparasites. Okay, very good. And the endo feed inside. 11, root knot nematode damage looks just like bacterial nodules found on legumes.
True.
I'm going to say false. They have more elongated knots. It could look at a glance like it, but the nodules on legumes are definitely different looking. And 12, soil amendments may help suppress nematodes.
True.
And again, I would say that's my number one management that I do, that I can do, that does work. And it whether it adds parasites and predators or puts a barrier between the nematodes that are there and my new plants, I don't know, but it works. Any additional questions?
Ralph, did you mention crushed crab shell?
Oh, say this again?
Did you mention the use of crushed crab shell?
Okay, the question about crushed crab shell, say that 5 times fast. I've heard of it. It was not in this particular PowerPoint, and I'm sure there are other materials that they found that might, and I think the idea with the crab was the chitin may be able to lacerate the nematodes and cause them to dehydrate. I don't know how well that works.
Yeah, I know at one time the Edison Estate swore by using that. They incorporated it whenever they made new raised beds.
Okay. And certainly that would be a nutrient additive as a bonus there too. Well, I'm going to turn it back to you, Tom. And I'm going to, again, we'll invite our Charlotte County Master Gardeners to hang around because you're going to do a mangrove thing, and I think Doug's going to follow up on some insect things. I'm going to stick around for a little bit, but I got another Zoom in a little while to go to. So thank you for your attention. Again, Dr. Billy Crow is the nematode guru, and he's very open to your specific questions, and he's very available, and he gets back to you really quick. And one day, we will have him down again in the new corona-free world that we'll be entering into.
Right. Well, thank you.
All right,
Ralph.
thank you.
That really, you seem like you really understand everything that's on all those slides, and there's quite a bit of information in there that I've not seen before.
I fooled you pretty good then, so thank you for that, and I'll try to keep up that ploy next time too. But I think it's an art and a science.